And so John prepares us for John prepares us for some practical instruction in this section of his letter, he does something really important in the midst of kind of this pastoral plea. And again, you even caught here in the verses this morning, he uses the phrase little children. This is not a like, I'm giving you this, I'm sharing this, I'm saying this with you because you better clean yourself up, because you gotta get right, or, get out kind of thing. It's this idea of like the severity and the pervasiveness of sin just wreaks havoc. And he doesn't want them to experience those kind of consequences and the pollution that sin has on all kinds of relationships. So he defines what we're actually dealing with. In verse 4, he says, everyone who makes a practice of sinning also practices lawlessness. Sin is lawlessness. That's the definition he gives in this section of his letter. Sin is a disregard for the law of God, which at its root is a disregard for God himself, the lawgiver. So we're not talking about civil laws here. What we're talking about is God's will and God's way best lived out in the midst of humanity. It's the moral and ethical code that stems from God himself. And what sin is doing is saying, God, what the moral and ethical code that you say is best for humanity, I'm not interested in it. And not even more than just not interested in it, is I'm willing to break it again and again and again, willingly. And so what he wants us to know is that when we disregard God's law, we're disregarding God himself. I've routinely said that what sin is, I think sometimes when we think of sin and lawlessness, that feels sometimes like tough biblical words, and we need to hear those, but we also need to know practically what that starts to look like in our everyday life is defining right and wrong in our own eyes. It's every choice we make, and we measure kind of what we should do. And I'm not talking always about like the gray kind of areas of like but what it is the principles of God when it begins to apply. It's when I'm that core root of the principle of God. What I'm willing to say is I'm not going to abide by that, and I'm not even going to try to apply that in my life. I'm going to simply disregard it. It's saying I'm going to define this core principle that God has given us, this right and wrong. I'm going to say, nope, not going to do it. And when we do that, we're actually enacting a barrier for other people to see God's will and God's way lived out. And so here's where the enemy loves to get in your ear, because we're in a spiritual battle. And what the enemy wants to do